to this week's episode of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. Grab a seat at the table as Masters rowing coaches Marlene Royal and Rebecca Caro share their biggest secrets on how to unleash your hidden potential and plot a new course for real results on the water and off. Now, on to the show.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. I'm Rebecca Caro and today we're going to be talking about how to give and how to receive feedback. One of the biggest challenges in Masters Rowing is we don't always have a coach. Quite often in a crew situation, we're helping each other. We're doing peer-to-peer coaching. We're doing in-boat coaching. And there's no obvious person who is the single leader. When it comes to feedback, this is a delicate topic. Some people may not want to hear what you have to say. You may not have the authority in the eyes of some of the other people to give advice and observations, which means that it won't be particularly well received. And as a consequence, I don't want you to get into hot water. So when it comes to feedback generally, whether you're an athlete or a coach athlete, the first way to start is to ask. Set the terms of engagement before you go on the water. Do you want feedback? Is this a session where we've got a particular focus? Can we agree what we're going to do? So that you've got a really clear framework around which to structure both the workout and the debrief afterwards. When the outing's over and we're in the group sort of feedback afterwards, one of the things I really like to do is to ask the individual athletes, how did it go? What were you particularly working on? Because if you know that first, then you can give feedback that's really aligned with what they were working on. Because if they say, I was working on the catches, and you give them feedback on the finishes, it doesn't help them sort of square those two things in their mind. Far better to concentrate on the thing that they were working on and save your view about the other things for another time. That's why talking before you go out on the water is so important, so that you know what people have been working on recently. When it comes to group feedback, that's a little more difficult because quite often there's a group dynamic and someone vocal, will start talking, which is great, gets the conversation going. But you have the risk that whatever is said in that first thing tends to be the thing that everyone else in the crew focuses on. And so I often like to start by asking the group to say one positive thing about the workout they've just done in that very first bit of feedback. The reason is that if the first couple of people who speak come out with things that can be perceived as negative, you can end up in this spiral of self-criticism, which isn't always very conducive to making a good learning experience. The way I like to coach is to give people something positive to take away with them and also something to work on. That's not necessarily something negative. And particularly for adults who are not used to being taught, I think that it is a careful balance that you have to strike between this mix of wanting them to make changes in order to improve their technique, their fitness, whatever it is, and also enabling them to hear what you have to say in a manner that they're ready to receive and to understand. And that is quite challenging. The worst thing is for someone to come away feeling very self-critical, negative, and feel dreadful about themselves and their contribution as a result of a group feedback session. When it comes to video reviews, this is a slightly different tone, I suppose, to feedback. I did a camp recently, as many of you know, and part of the workouts was, of course, me videoing the crew. And when we came to give feedback, we were all there together. There were 6 people plus myself and a coach who was in what they called a ride-along capacity, who was sort of watching and learning and asking questions for their own education. And I set the framework for the video review at the very beginning, before I played any of the video back to the group. And the framework was this: when we watch the video, you can say anything you like about yourself and your rowing. But if you want to make observations about other people who are rowing, please only say positive things. Now, that very clearly signals the care with which people have to address what they see and how it is vocalized, because you may not know people well enough to know if they're going to receive that sort of feedback in a constructive way or not. And so rather than risk people feeling very attacked, I preferred to constrain the feedback in that particular way. And you may want to do something slightly different. It depends how well you know the group. One of the other problems I have with video reviews and video feedback is that when I look at video, I see things very clearly. I can see when someone, for example, is squaring late, but quite often the athlete doesn't know what to look for in the rowing that they're watching. And that's when, again, starting with something like, what do you see? How did it go? What were you working on? Can you see what you were working on and when you were doing it well and when you thought it was less good? And that works really nicely, particularly if the video you've got is quite short, something like 30 to 40 seconds, because you can play it on a loop and they can watch it quite quickly and go, you know, that's the point at which this was happening. And this is what I tried to do about it. And then it allows everybody to look and focus in on that particular aspect of the stroke cycle, the technique, and begin to, I suppose, upskill their own eye at evaluating and looking at rowing. To the uninitiated, it's like me going and watching ice skating. Much as I love ice dance and seeing how people whirl and swirl and twirl and twist and jump, I can't tell the difference between many of the different moves that they make because I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know whether I'm looking for them turning and twisting in one direction. I don't know if I'm looking for a 2-footer or 1-foot takeoff. I don't know if I'm looking for things that their arms do, things that their head does. And so rowing is very similar because the refinements that we're seeking to make are really very, very small, and they can often look very insignificant when you're watching video. It helps for the group to acquire the skill at looking and observing and seeing subtle nuance before you dive into a lot of detail. Unsolicited feedback is even more difficult. We've all probably been in a public gym and seen someone rowing like Mr. Bean on the erg and just really wanted to warn them about back injuries or make some suggestions about how they might enjoy themselves a little bit more with a little bit more skill and finesse. And of course, it's never welcomed if you have tried doing it. I was rowing the other day in my single and I went past a couple of people from my club in the double, and it looked to me like they were having a bit of a tough time. And as I came near to them, I was going a little faster than they were. So we were sort of side by side for a little bit. I looked over and I said, do you want some feedback? Actually, I think I might have said, do you want some coaching? And they replied, no. And there you go. That was the perfect outcome. I asked, I offered, they refused. I'm not offended. I go on and carry on with my own rowing, leaving them to do their rowing. And I think unsolicited feedback can be offered, but it has to be prefaced with an agreement from the other party to receive what you have to say. May I give you some feedback? May I give you some coaching? Would you like some feedback or some coaching? And if they say no, you have to respect them for it. But the positive side of this is that when or if they do say yes, you have prepared them mentally to receive what you are going to say. You have to be in the right frame of mind to want to receive coaching. And when you get coached, generally, the coach wants you to take on the advice that's being offered. And so again, getting into that right place so that you can hear what's being said and then are minded to do something about it afterwards really helps for the offer to be well received and also to be heard and understood by the other party. And the final thing about giving feedback is it's my belief that when I'm coaching masters, I usually only focus on one thing in an outing. That one thing may have several layers to it. So you might start with a slightly basic version and build on it and then build on it again. But we all know how hard it is to think of more than one thing at a time when you're in the rowing boat. And so when giving feedback, it's my preference to wrap up the discussion with the one thing you want them to take away and obviously to put into practice on the next workout. And so there you go. That's my suggestion about how I think we can constructively work together to frame up the situation before we go rowing, in which feedback and advice and observations can be offered and received, and then to set up the best ways of enabling each other to hear and act on what's offered. Till next time. Bye-bye.
We are part of the Rowing Chat Podcast Network. Please tell your rowing friends about the show. And if you've learned just one helpful thing from today's episode, please consider supporting the show for as little as $1 per month by visiting fastermastersrowing.com/podcast.